So we are in the third seminar. It's going to take us up until November 2023, as all of the chapter authors have given up their time at the end of every Wednesday, just like tonight, to share a little bit more on the chapter, a little bit more on their research, and the hope to just get you thinking about, you know, do I understand what care is? Do I linger around this notion I've got to be cruel to be kind? How can I develop it? Because as those of you who have read the book will see, not only are we looking at the person in front of us as a thread that goes through each chapter, we're also trying to get some practical takeaways, key things that people might say, okay, I've got this foundation. I'd like to be able to build on that. I'd like to be able to understand this a little bit more. So Colin will take us through some practical parts as well for you to be able to implement in your own environment or understand with a bit more clarity. We are delighted that this book has come together. For those of you who are not familiar with it, 32 chapter authors contributed across the 20 chapters, and they come from 12 different parts of the world. Practitioners on the ground, academics, and then a blend. So I'm just so privileged. I've built Colin. He said to me, "You've put out a tweet tonight to say you're excited. Like, what are you doing, Jen?" I was like, "I genuinely am." And I've heard Colin for years in different spaces, sharing the works of Nell Nodding, his own work, a lot of stuff that underpins and experiences that he's had. And I guess one of the things before I launch into, or pass you over rather, I sit back and take it in what he's about to share with us. I thought it would be nice to share a little snippet, either as a reminder for those who have read the chapter or those who haven't, to see kind of where we might go with this. And it's each to their own tonight, based on kind of how you're arriving here with us and this whole idea of care in sport coaching. So the opening of the chapter: sport coaches have often been caricatured as dominant, demonstrative, and dictatorial. In popular culture, this strong disciplinarian and sometimes abusive trope is shared in films and documentaries. There's a few pop into my head already when people reference great coaching, and I go, ooh. For example, an analysis of 19 sport films revealed 346 incidents of emotionally abusive coaching, and it's referenced for you to dive into that. In 68.2% of these incidences, the coach was depicted enacting this abuse, which included yelling. I could wave my hands up. I definitely did an excessive amount of that at the start of my coaching career. Name calling, threatening athletes, demanding excessive exercise, and throwing objects. What these films reveal perpetrate at times, and critically questioned to some extent, is a pervasive myth that is the coach is to be powerful, to be demanding, and the cliche that coaches need to be cruel to be kind. So I'm going to stop there before I trip over any of my words. Every time I go through that, from the initial time I read it, it stuck in my mind as something, as a reference point. So like I mentioned there, some people might say to me, have you seen this brilliant movie of Coach Carter? Have you seen this brilliant movie or documentary on Netflix of some coaching? And, with the background of basketball that I have, I was like, oh, I don't know, have we thought about this? So I'm not going to go any further on that. I'm going to pass over to Colin, but we're delighted to have you here. The opening question tonight was, where are you joining us from? So hopefully as the evening goes on, we get to know more about you and the numbers. We've got some large numbers, but equally have an intimate session if the numbers are low near the back end to do some Q&A. So Colin, over to you, and I'm delighted to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks, Amy, as well, for inviting me to contribute to the book, which has been a huge success. So if anybody hasn't got that, there's a front cover there, and I'm sure Amy and Jen will do a sales pitch if required at the end. But it's a really good book. I've really enjoyed reading the other chapters, so thanks for putting it together. For anybody who doesn't know, I'm Dr Colum Cronin, lecturer at Liverpool John Moores University. Liverpool John Moores, I lead our master's degree in sports coaching, including our UK and international groups, and I'm pleased to see some of our excellent students from those groups on the call. As part of that work at John Moores, I have been researching care and coaching, talking to coaches about how they care, talking to athletes about what care they need. Some other colleagues of mine are also exploring those areas. They're on the call as well. An acknowledgement there for Colin Lewis, who I spotted, Rick Southworth, and Amy herself is researching care as well. So we've got a few people on the call interested in this topic and researching that. As Jen said, tonight I'm going to explore chapter 18 in the book, and in chapter 18 focuses on the myth that coaches have to be cruel to be kind, coaches have to be dominating, dictatorial. And in my research, I think that impression arises from quite a dated view of leadership. So early in the chapter, we look at where did that great man theory come from, and how has it been maintained a little bit. And actually, as the chapter progresses, we make an argument that actually you don't have to be dictatorial. Caring can be a positive way of helping people to flourish. And that then takes us to our topic tonight, which is care in sports coaching and how might we do that instead. So to get straight into it then, I'm going to see if we can get some interaction from people on the call. So if the technology allows, you might be able to contribute a perspective on this question here. Coaching is about participants' needs. Okay, so do you agree? Do you disagree? And the way to do that is to maybe go to your options, which in my case is up the top of my screen. It might be at the top or the bottom of yours. There's an annotate button there. If you choose annotate and then you choose stamp, you should be able to take your cursor and put it on the left-hand side. Oh, sorry, I should do it myself. So annotate, stamp, put a cursor. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Or are you somewhere in the middle? So let's see if you can maybe get a quick poll going on here. If you can't contribute with the annotate function, feel free to stick an answer in the chat. And I believe Jenny or Amy is watching the chat closely, so they can let us know. But I'm seeing lots of people over this left-hand side of agree. I've got one person over here with a heart disagreeing. Oh, and I've just added something next to them as well. So there's at least two, one person over there, somebody in the middle. I like the arrow, and I've got a smiley face as well. So that's not so bad. So we'll give people a couple of more seconds. Some people moving down the continuum a little bit. So it doesn't have to be fully agree. You might mainly agree, but not always agree. And what we'll do then is we'll stop there and we'll maybe explore that a little bit and think, okay, so if we say for the majority of us, coaching is about participants' needs, then that might take us to, and we'll clear all the drawings. That might take us to the question of how do we know what is a participant's need? So the majority, not all of us think it's about that. The majority of us thought it was about that. Well, the main care theorist exploring needs and how we might meet those needs is a philosopher of education called Nell Noddings. And she's got 4 criteria to help people decide what is a want versus what is a need. And I hear this idea of coaches have to meet athletes' needs all the time, but I hear very few people then explore what is a need and how do we know what the needs are. And this is where Nell Noddings might help us. And very helpfully, I've put this into Amy and Jen's book on page 229. You can see there the page number down the bottom. And she's got 4 criteria to help coaches or nurses or educators or primary school teachers, social workers to decide, right, is somebody has a want here or does somebody have a need that needs to be met? And the first one is, Noddings argues that a want which is stable, which is persistent over a long time turns into a need. And I think about this all the time with my children. So we went to the circus the other night and my little boy who's 4 years old, and he wanted to buy a flashing light sword, and he saw it, another child have it, and he wanted to buy it, but he'd never considered one before, I didn't get him one at the circus. I was very harsh and maybe a little bit cruel at that instance. but he hasn't mentioned it since, which makes me think actually it wasn't a need, it was a want, a fleeting moment, a fleeting want. Okay. And then there is another way though, where a want might actually be a need, but doesn't have to be long term. If that want is very intense or very important, it might become a need. Okay, so that might be, so we're looking at wants that are long term, or we're looking at wants that are really important might turn into a need. But a fleeting moment that is fairly trivial is probably not a need. The second one here that we're looking at is a want that is connected to some desirable end, or at least not harmful. So this idea that there's a benefit. Okay, so you know, for example, our athlete might have a want. They want to develop a nutritional program. Okay, and they keep asking for a nutritional program. They want to improve their nutrition over time. They bring this up, and there's a benefit to their to the end in terms of it will help performance. Okay, so a second thing here is it desirable, or is it at least not harmful? So there are two criteria that help us. And if I give you an example here, for instance, my daughter then is 8 years old and she wants to go to swimming lessons. I now need to decide, is this a want because her friend has joined swimming lessons and this is just something that's popped into her head and that she's decided? Because things like that happen a lot to my daughter. She decided the other day she wanted a unicorn, for instance, because she saw one on telly. So is this a want or is it need, these swimming lessons? Well, actually, to be fair to her, she's been asking for swimming lessons for a few months now, really probably since last summer. So it's a considerable period of time and she keeps bringing this up. Is it a demonstrable, desirable end? Well, yes, it is, because we live out in the countryside. There's a lovely river nearby, and every summer the children go and swim in the river. So she wants to be able to go swim in the river with her friends. There's a safety benefit to that. There's a social benefit to that. There might be a physical activity benefit to that. So I'm looking at part one and part two, and I'm thinking actually here, maybe my daughter needs swimming lessons. It's stable. We've thought about it. It's beneficial. Well, okay. And is it within my means to help her get those swimming lessons? Okay, there's a bit of a waiting list, but we can at least put her name on the waiting list and get her swimming lessons at the pool. So we can start looking at, okay, do I have the power to meet that need? And am I willing and able to contribute to that need? Well, to a point. I'm happy to get her swimming lessons, but I don't want her to become an Olympic swimmer because I don't want to do the 5 o'clock in the mornings in the pool. Okay, so what I'd like to do is maybe get her swimming lessons to a certain point. So we get to the idea here that by really thinking about the wants and the needs of my daughter, we can work out a plan of action that, yes, I'm going to put her name on the list. We're going to commit to it to a point where she can swim in the river, but we're not going to commit to it to a point where she becomes an Olympic swimmer. So we start getting action based on the wants and the needs of my daughter. And that's how I think these criteria can be helpful for coaches. They can give us some criteria to think about what are the wants and the needs of the athletes that we're coaching. And considering them might lead us to take an action that meets those needs, or might lead us to deciding that these are just fleeting wants, or that these are long-term wants, but they've got no desirable benefit. Therefore, we're not going to take action. So it gives us some criteria to decide what are the needs of our athletes and what are the wants of our athletes, and do we want to take action and what that action might be. So on that basis, I'm going to ask you to contribute again. Okay, so same setup. Okay, go to options and annotate and stamp. Okay, and hopefully then you're in a position to stamp, do you agree? Do athletes need to win, or do athletes just want to win? Is it a fleeting want or is it a need? So this one's probably a little bit more controversial. Greg's come straight in there. Thank you for that contribution, Greg. Luke is backing you up. Michelle is kind of hedging her bets a little bit. Okay, Helen, you're right in the middle, sitting on a fence. I believe that is Rick, who's one of our old master's students, who's drawing in blue pen, and I'll be holding him accountable the next time I bump into Rick for his drawings. Okay. Oh, I've got some people over the other side. giving us ticks. Do athletes need to win? I'll give 10 more seconds for people to put on their things. It depends. It depends has popped up. Okay, so 5 more seconds to get your contribution in here. And we'll ask people to pause at that point, and we'll have a think about this. So from my point of view, I can understand why we've got a range of answers to that, including the it depends, because I think it does depend. So being from Liverpool John Moores University, we're very aware that there's a big football match happening this Sunday, this weekend, Champions League, Liverpool. And I'm wondering for them that this might be a need to win. So it's something that they'll have been working for at least for a year, if not for 2 years, really, probably, since they last won it. And it's against Real Madrid, who they played 3 years ago. So it might have been an element of 3 years working to get back into this position to win the Champions League against Real Madrid. Not mutually exclusive. Yeah, a bit of both. Sam, I agree as well. And it's nice to have you on. So it might be a need to win for Liverpool this weekend. There's a desirable benefit. So the club will get income, budgets, finances, contracts. There's the esteem of winning it. There's the pride of winning it. There's the achieving goal, confidence. So there's a desirable. Is it within their control? Not entirely, but they can definitely take steps and are trying to take steps to win it. And are the coaches on board trying to help them to win it? Then yes, they are. So I think in that instance, it probably meets criteria for Nottings that yes, this weekend they have a need to win. They might not meet that need, but they have a need to win. But this weekend is not the only weekend. My daughter, although she doesn't know it yet, also has an under-8s football game. And I know this because I'm the coach, but she doesn't know this because I haven't told her team yet. And I started to think, well, Liverpool might need to win. Does my daughter need to win this weekend? And I'm not so sure about that. I know that when she finds out there's a game, she'll want to win. But at this moment, she's not even thinking about a game, or she's not even thinking about a competition. It's a friendly game. She's not even aware of it. And pretty much 5 minutes after the game, she'll have forgotten about the result and moved on anyway. We'll be back onto unicorns at that stage. So it'll be a very fleeting want. So I don't think it meets Notting's first criteria. Does she need to win this weekend? The second point is interesting. Is it desirable for her to win? Well, possibly it is desirable for her to win. There's a confidence boost that might come with that, and that might lead to a sense of motivation, increased motivation. So there is a desirable outcome that comes from winning. But then again, maybe there's a desirable outcome that might not come from winning if all she's ever doing is winning. Well, the novelty of winning wear off. So on this stage, I would say that she kind of wants to win this weekend when she finds out about the game, but it's not really a need. Because if she loses this weekend, she's still going to go to football practice next week, and she'll still play with her friends. It's not going to be such a big event that it will dent her confidence and her motivation that much that it would stop. So I think my daughter wants to win this weekend, but I don't think she needs to win this weekend, which then for me allows me to take action as a coach. So I can look at this and say, okay, maybe she has other needs this weekend that I can help her with and meet those needs instead. So again, it's this idea of really thinking about what are the needs of the players and then taking action. So if she doesn't need to win this weekend, is that my opportunity to play her in a different position? Is that my opportunity to give her a new challenge? I want you to use your non-dominant foot. Is that an opportunity to work on teamwork or cohesion or tactics? So if we don't need to win, that can then inform what actions I take, but only because I've taken the time to use Notting's framework and think about what are the needs of the girls in the under-8s this weekend. And then I suppose Jurgen Klopp might well be thinking the same thing. I don't know, but he does need to win this weekend. Probably not the weekend for trying out new tactics or trying out new things, because his athletes have got different needs than my under-8s have. And hence we're back into this. It depends, not mutually exclusive, a range of answers that really are determined by thinking about the needs of the people in front of us. So if I clear all my drawings here, and if I close this down, I'm going to move on to another one. Okay, another controversial one. So again, asking for your contributions, options, annotate, stamp, and choose. Where do you sit? Do we need to fail? So the opposite, do athletes need to fail? Again, we'll give 30. Oh, we got lots of people saying yes, coming straight in about that. I think I saw Rob Crump there. Okay, so we got Colin on there. I think Colin's writing his initials on this, borderline graffiti call. Thank you for that. So we got some people over here on the left-hand side. Most people are saying athletes need to fail. And again, this is interesting to me because I'm not sure any of the athletes want to fail. So this is where I'm coming back to Noddings. I'm thinking none of my athletes are having a sustained coming up and asking me, can I lose this weekend? Can I fail? Can I be unsuccessful? And they're not doing that in a sustained way. So maybe Nodding's first point isn't that helpful here. But Nodding's second point might come in here. This is the idea that, is there a demonstrable benefit? Is it desirable? Okay, is there an end that's beneficial? And I suspect what most people are thinking here is that, yeah, there might be some benefits in failing or losing or being unsuccessful. It might prompt athletes to reflect. It might build resilience. It might prompt athletes to work outside a comfort zone and learn. So now I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute, my athletes might need to fail. So now I'm thinking, what am I doing for my friendly schedules over the preseason? Do I want to build in a couple of tough oppositions to meet those needs of failing? What am I doing in terms of the tasks and the challenge that I'm giving athletes in training? Do I want to every now and then up the intensity or up the standard so that we can have that failing? If that's a need that they have and my actions are meeting those needs. Of course, it could be too much. If we lose every week, even with my daughter's under-8s team, that's going to dent their motivation and their confidence again. So I might need a little bit of failure, but not too much. And again, I have to act on that and organize a competition structure that allows that, and organize a training structure that allows that. So by thinking about the needs and by using Nodding's criteria, I can then start designing my sessions, my activities, my oppositions, my competitions to meet those needs, so that we're making sure we've got needs-centered, needs-focused coaching in place. So I'll return very quickly to Noddings just to give you a little recap of those 4 criteria again. But I think we kind of went through them and hopefully that made sense. And a want becomes a need when it's stable over a period of time, or if it's very, very important. A want is also have some sort of desirable end. Okay, it becomes a need. Okay, so a need that is not harmful. So it might be harmful to lose every competition, every week, every time, but actually it might be beneficial to lose every now and then. So we might need to think about that and think about the ratio of that. And then the challenge is us. Do we have the power to address those needs? If so, yes. Do we want to get involved and meet those needs? If not, do we then need to bring somebody else in who might have the power? Do we need to connect and signpost athletes? So an athlete might have a need for support around nutrition, but that's outside my area of expertise. I might not have the power or knowledge to address that. So the way I can help them is by signposting them to a registered nutritionist or a sports psychologist, for instance. So we need to also recognize what are the limits of our power to meet athletes' needs. And when we reach those limits, do we reach out? And again, Nodding's framework is a nice reminder of that, to look at the needs of the athletes and think about, are we capable of meeting them? I see a star on there from Greg. I'm going to assume that he's supporting me on this. Thanks for running behind me, Greg. Okay, he's done it twice now, so he's very, very keen. Much appreciated. So if I move on again and cause you another challenge, okay, same opportunity up the top, for me at least, options, annotate, stamp. Do athletes need to develop technique? Do they need to improve their technique, whether that's swimming or gymnastics or dance or rugby, basketball, football? Do they need their technique? Okay. Lots of people coming in, going to give it 5 more seconds. I'm trying to think about this now with Notting's criteria in mind. Do athletes want to develop their technique regularly? Some athletes might do. They might want to get better every single week. And is there a desirable benefit of having better technique and better skill? Maybe skill might have been a less contentious word here to use. Yeah, there probably is improved performance, improved knowledge, improved success, better experience because they're more skillful. So it probably meets Notting's second criteria. But really, to improve an athlete's skill and technique and to meet that need, then the athlete needs to be showing over a sustained period of time that they want to develop that technique. But I'm not sure all athletes come to all sessions wanting to develop technique or needing to develop technique. And here I'm thinking about beginners trying out a sport. The first time they come and try out a sport, they probably don't need to develop technique. They probably need to develop some friends or have some fun or need to develop an understanding of rules or the game. So again, it's just having a think and what are the needs of the people in the session. In that taster session, the needs might be fun, enjoyment, movement, friendship, in which case we need to design our session to meet those needs. But again, in a different environment, let's say an academy where you're trying to develop high performers, those high performers might be turning up day in, day out, trying to get better at performance, knowledge, success. So they might have a need to develop technique, and that then needs to inform our sessions. So again, our sessions, our programs need to be focused on the needs of the athletes, and they can be different. Okay, I'm going to skip the next one in the interest of time. And I'm just going to clear all of these. But it was, do athletes need to make friends? And the reason why I'm going to skip it is just because I think we're kind of making the point now here that needs of athletes can be very different. Notting's 4 criteria give us a framework to start thinking about those needs, but they also, in the last 2 points in particular, challenge us and to see, are we able and the capacity to meet those needs, and are we willing to meet those needs? And that's a useful starting point if you want needs-centered practice. A couple of other principles that Nottings has that fits into this to make this work are 3 concepts. Now, these are briefly covered in the chapter, so feel free to get a copy. But there's engrossment, which is really focused on observation. There's motivational displacement, which is really about putting your motivation to one side and meeting the needs of the other. So you're focusing on what their needs are. And there's reciprocity, which is the idea that actually they've got to contribute too. So they've got to have sustained wants, and we've got to do this together. It's not just one person doing it. In practice, though, because I'm keen to make sure we cover some of that, I think a lot of this begins with, again, knowing these needs. What are the needs of our athletes? And I've got 4 ideas here of how we might go about this engrossment. So this engrossment is sustained attention. It's not just a fleeting glance at a player in a session. It's kind of really purposeful attention to understand the needs of our players. Okay, and I'm going to start with observation. I'm going to go anti-clockwise. So not a fleeting glance, a sustained noticing, a sustained attention, so that we can look at those young people and think, yeah, they need to win this week, or they need to make some friends, or they need to improve their technique of not in their non-dominant technique, or they need to improve their nutrition. So it's sustained attention so that you infer a best observation of what that athlete needs. So we can, I'd encourage all of us to do that. The other way you can understand your athlete's needs is by looking at the evidence. So we work at Liverpool John Moores, we work on the master's programs, we take research and we look at that and we think, okay, what does the research tell us about the needs of 8-year-olds? What does the research tell us about the needs of young performers transitioning into first teams or into international competition? What does the evidence tell us about masters athletes or athletes who are about to retire? What are their needs? So we can look at the evidence and the research to infer, right, they're similar to my athlete, therefore my athlete might have those needs as well. But when you do that, do check. Don't transfer the research from masters athletes to 8-year-olds. So do check. Going anti-clockwise, we're down to experience. And again, we can use our own experience here. Many of us will have coached. Many of us will have written down session plans. Hopefully we'll have written down reflections. Use your experience. What were the needs of the players I've previously worked with in this domain? What were those needs? What worked for them? How did we meet those needs? So revisit and reflect on those session plans and evaluations. Don't let them just gather dust. Use them to think about what are the needs of this group based on what I've seen before. And in all three of them, you can kind of get a best guess about what your athletes need. But I think the one that's really powerful is dialogue in this bottom right-hand corner. And I think it's really powerful because that's the one where they actually tell you how they're feeling and what they need. And I think that's really powerful because it confirms what you were thinking, or it gives you an alternative perspective. So based on observation, evidence, and experience, you might have a dialogue and they might confirm, yeah, I need to develop my non-dominant foot, for instance, or my strength, or I need more flexibility, or a nutritional plan. So depending on what they express, that might confirm. But then you're also in a dialogue with them. So now you're in a position to say, great, how are we going to go about it? And together, you can get that motivational displacement where you're now working on how can I help you and how can you contribute to this as well. So it becomes reciprocal and motivational displacement because of a dialogue. So I think observation is great. I think evidence is great and experience is great, but dialogue is key because it can confirm that and it can give you a path for thinking, right, how are we going about meeting your needs? How am I going to go about getting my 8-year-old swimming lessons, for instance? Okay. So with that in mind, then those three principles are engrossment, where you spend sustained attention looking at the needs, but then motivational displacement, where you act based on those needs and you do it together. And that seems to me like a pretty good way to develop a coach-athlete relationship, which is focused on developing an athlete, a much better way than that stereotypical dictatorial coach that Jen was talking about at the start. So actually, let's look at their needs as a basis for building a relationship that's focused on helping them flourish. I want to give some practical examples. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to fly through these, so please bear with me. So here's an example of a coach doing some of this. So in this case, it's a high performance coach. This is a coach who's been an international coach, very successful. And the coach talks about one of the truisms of coaching is that the athlete cannot see what the coach can, because the athlete's not in the same position, hasn't got the same experience, but the coach cannot feel what the athlete can. So the coach doesn't know how the athlete is feeling. This is important because if there's a disconnect between the two, it's often because the language is too visual coming from the coach about what the coach sees, and it's not enough coming from the athlete about what they feel. And I think this is a really powerful quote that emphasizes the importance of dialogue. So then I followed up and I asked this coach, well, how do you have these conversations? And he schedules coffee shop conversations, come early to practice, stay after practice, or he makes sure he sits on the bus with them or sits on the plane in his instances, or it's conversations over dinner where he's asking questions. How do you feel? Tell me what you're feeling. What was that like? Watch this. What were you feeling at this time? So he can get a better idea of the athlete's needs, and then together they can adjust their training program. So it's together then they start working and acting upon those needs. I said I was going to try to fly through these, but I'm not, so forgive me. Here we go again. Empathy. So this is again an international coach at a training camp for young performers. So these are teenage performers trying to get into an international squad. And the coach in question was very cautious about overtraining them to intensity because they wouldn't have been used to that step up from club to international, and talked about, I need to be careful. I need to make sure they're not just doing sessions to impress me and are going to get injured. Are they getting fatigued? Is the session planned okay? Is it too easy, or is it too hard? And you can see here the coach is observing reflecting in action with compassion and empathetically observing to see, right, what is it that this athletes need? Do I need to increase the intensity or lower the intensity? So planning that so that the coach has the space to see that, I think was useful. So that's in action. Previous example was maybe off the field of play, so away from the track and the court and the pitch. This one's actually on the field of play, how we can still be observing, showing engrossment, and doing that in an empathetic way. Here's another international coach. I think this was under 20s at a European Championship. It's athletics. And the coach brought chocolate milk to the finish line so the athletes can have it. To be honest, if they've had a really bad race, I'll have to mop up tears, or if they're hyper, I'll have to calm them down. And chocolate milk was the way to do that. And I'm not sure I can think of anything more nurturing than chocolate milk. The athletes are either crying or laughing, and I'll deal with that. But that's based on the coach's experience. That's what they've seen at previous international meets and international events. And then they've said, okay, I can infer that at this one, this is what they're going to need. So the coach went out and got the chocolate milk ready for them. Some other examples in practice, Gano Overway, I'll talk about SEEN as a nice acronym. So S stands for support. So keep providing feedback throughout the season, but keep asking for feedback as well throughout the season. So you know if a sustained want is becoming a need. So if we have one bad game where our training wasn't, our performance wasn't quite right, well, that's okay, but let's see if it becomes a need rather than overreacting to a simple want. Okay, connect. So have a look and see, can we connect people? So let's have a buddy break so they can talk to somebody. Let's do icebreakers. Let's get to know them by asking how their families know about them and how they're perceiving things. That might work in a youth setup. In an adult performance setup, for instance, you might talk to some of your support staff. That could be medical team, that could be education, welfare officers, that could be assistant coaches, S&C coaches. They might notice something in the gym that you might be able to use out on the pitch, track, or court, for instance, or pool. Empower, bring them in, okay, and let them have a say, because they will design stuff to meet their own needs. How can we improve this drill? Can you take this warm-up? Is this working for you? What would you do with this drill? What would you do with this program? Because they know stuff about their body and they know stuff about their needs that we don't know. So why not empower them? Because they can then start telling us, well, actually, I feel a bit tight today, so I would move this session here and I would do this instead. And now you're beginning to understand their needs. Hang on, you're a bit tight. Okay, tell me more about that. So let's ask them to have a say in the session as a route to understanding what they're thinking and feeling. And then nurture care. So don't just take it on yourself, the entire care labor, nurture it within your caring environment. So if you see one of your assistant coaches caring, taking notice, meeting somebody's needs, reward that. If you see one of your players doing that, maybe a senior player caring for a junior player, reward that. And recognize care as a good thing in itself. So then what we start doing is moving completely away from that stereotypical view of the coach that we see in movies that Jen was talking about, to actually a real caring environment, where this environment is about looking out for each other and helping each other. And some of that might even come back to you as a coach. Who's looking out for you? Okay, so can we develop more carers around us? Can we task our assistant coaches? Can you watch and observe Joey and Jane today? And I'm going to watch Jeff and Alex over here instead. And I'm going to sustainably watch them. And next week, you can plan a session based on their needs, and I'll plan a session based on their needs. So start developing caring assistant coaches around us. And then create a clear environment, clear and safe environment that people can open up to, but also remember those boundaries. Can I meet those needs? If not, I might need to outsource it to somebody else. The athlete welfare officer, the medical team, a safeguarding and child protective. Does it need to go to a sports psychologist? Remember Nodding's 4 points. Can I meet those needs, and am I willing to meet those needs? Work 2 of those points. So know your boundaries. Couple of other examples: know people's names, dispositions, strengths, weaknesses. If you see them a little bit off, maybe go over and ask them, are you okay? No. Are you okay? Ask them twice. How are you? All right? Are you all right? So don't take the first answer, and challenge them again so that they feel they can open up. Know people's hopes and fears, and then we can start working to helping them with them. Pre-plan opportunities to listen, arrive early, stay late. As I said, move the seating plan around at dinner. Not all coaches here and athletes here. Let's move them around so we can hear. Okay, not all the coaches sat at the front of the bus and the athletes at the back. Let's mix up the seating plan so we can talk to people. Plan the observation. Again, don't take it all on yourself. If you're in a grassroots sport and you've got a parent, can you two watch this person today? Tell me how you think they got on. Okay, let's use the parents. How do you think Jane's getting on here? How can we help her? Is there anything she's struggling with? Okay, and check your processes. So, you know, are your sessions, are your structures, are your competition schedule, are they based on your inferences, or have you confirmed with dialogue that this is meeting their needs? Okay, so check, are our processes and systems consistent with that? I think this is my second last slide, which I'm going to do in about 30 seconds, which will give us about 15 minutes for chat. Some things that I'm thinking about, because this isn't necessarily a silver bullet for all coaching's problems. Okay, I think coaching involves care, but I think it involves lots of other things as well. So I wanted to put out there some of the challenges in developing more caring coaches that I'm thinking about is, do we recruit coaches who are caring, or do we recruit coaches that are like those stereotypical coaches in movies? They're shouting, they're controlling, and potentially abusive. Is that who we see as the coach, and therefore is our recruitment that? Or are we recruiting great listeners? Are we recruiting people who are great at observing? Or are we recruiting the coaches who are great at shouting? So that's something for us to think about. Do we educate coaches to care? So when we do communication on coach education courses, is it about sending messages or is it about receiving messages? Because I suspect the receiving is the better way to understand people's needs, that dialogue again. Do our systems and resources enable the coach to care? Have they got capacity? Now, this is one that is occupying a lot of my time. So do coaches have time to observe? Do they have time to change and capacity to change competition structures to meet their needs? Or have we given them a one-size-fits-all competition structure? My eight-year-old girls team, daughter's team, they've never played a game until October. Since October, they've played every week. That's probably a competition structure not meeting their needs. Okay, so we need to have a look at that and think, should there be a more gradual one there for entry? And do we have evidence of care working and being applied? That's one for the researchers on the call and a bit of a challenge. We've got evidence from talking to coaches about how they care. I gave you some examples. We've now got evidence coming out from athletes about what care they want, but we've got very little evidence yet of care happening in the field. So how does it happen on a Tuesday night in the rain in Liverpool or in Malta or wherever you are coaching? So these are questions for researchers to look at. So that's me, my presentation. I hope you all found that helpful. As I said, there's a lot more in the chapter in Amy and Jenny's book. Please get a copy. If anybody wants to get in touch, I'm at Liverpool John Moores. I'm doing a master's programs where we're trying to develop more caring coaches. Get in touch if you just want to chat, or if you want to get involved as a student or a placement host, or you just want to chat care, feel free to reach out. We're happy to have conversations. Amy, I don't know if there's any questions in the chat, or if we got time.
Yeah, definitely. Colin, thanks so much for that. I'm sure everyone has, but I've made an absolute ton of notes. And I think what it hopefully will encourage coaches to do is kind of really reflect on whether they are, you know, adopting these principles of engrossment and motivational displacement. And I think using the scene kind of framework is a really good kind of, not a structure as such to be rigid, but just to, you know, question ourselves, you know, are we doing these things? Are we at least attempting to within our coaching? And if not, why? And could we do better and do certain things, apply more to certain groups of athletes that we're working with? Going back to the questions you were asking earlier, are certain things more relevant at certain levels of the coaching spectrum or age groups and things like that? And then finally, I think it's really important for us to consider, you know, wants and needs, and do we fully understand the wants and needs of our athletes? Harley mentioned in the chat, it's a difficult thing to be able to differentiate and distinguish. So yeah, I've got lots of kind of reflections spinning around in my head. And then the final one, if there's any people in this webinar that are employing coaches, I think that's a really good point to consider. You know, are we employing caring coaches? So really nice point to finish on there. So Colum, if you want to stop sharing, Vinny has asked a really nice question around the power dynamic. Vinny, I don't know if you want to pop yourself off mute and ask that question. We've kind of got a nice small enough group for us to be able to do that. And I know you like to chat, Vinny.
Hello.
Hey, Vinny.
Hello. Thank you for that, everybody. Fascinating again. And you know, I'm a big advocate. I'm just writing at something at the moment about redefining coaching as caring, because the more you look at it, I think that's what we do as coaches. We care, and that's the ultimate. But anyway, that's another one. Yeah, I just think about the power dynamic and how we relate as coaches. Once coaches go on a coaching course, they think they know everything to be able to deliver, and you know, and there's the support around that. Do we then not reach out because we think we've got all the tools in our little box to help us deliver what we're doing? And I think we become a little bit insular because of all those power dynamics, as in the content that you've been given from the governing body, the club dynamics as well, those current ways of delivering in the club. Therefore, you become very insular in your own little environment. That was just a question, really.
It's a great question, Vinny, and I say we could probably go all night. But if I was to give my first thought, it would be around this idea of humility, and that we often have this perception of this all-knowing coach in control of everything. And it's a little bit like the duck floating across the pond, whereas underneath, actually, most coaches are flapping, and most coaches are just keeping their plate spinning. The parents, the assistant coaches, the performance directors, the athletes, the support staff, these are all going on, and most coaches are just managing to keep a bit of order amongst the chaos of coaching. But most of us aren't able to admit to that and to recognize that complexity, because we have this stereotype that the coach is infallible and that the coach is strong and is in complete control. And the sooner we go to the humble approach and say, well, actually, this is what I know, but I don't know everything, then you're in a better position to say, well, actually, the athlete has some knowledge that we can use. The parent has some knowledge that we can use. And the sooner we adopt that humility, and the more we reward humility in coaches and encourage that, I think we'll open up into a position where actually we can work with people to effect change rather than pretending we've got complete control of what is a chaotic process. Don't know if that helps, Vinny.
It all helps.
Do you want to come back, or should we get somebody else in?
No, I just think it links to the, you know, we've done sessions before with Anna around the biography stuff. I think that links learning how to learn and understanding yourself, epistemology and ontology quite clearly, looking at how we know where knowledge emanates from in the current world, how we live. I think once you start to understand that, you start to be a little bit more humble in your approach to your profession, whatever the profession is.
And let's be absolutely clear, a bit like Jen at the start, I have gotten this wrong so many times. And I look back now and I cringe, and where I was trying to present that all-powerful dictatorial coach. And even now, I still struggle with that on a weekly basis to move away. So this is not an easy ask, and coaches need support. But yeah, the more confident we are in ourselves that we can then admit what we do know and what we don't know and what we're struggling with, the better support we'll get and the better we can all work together. But it's taken me a long time to get anywhere near that, and I'm definitely not the finished article.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Vinny. Finton, do you want to ask your question?
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, sorry, I'm in the car. Mentioned about resilience just there, and it's part of the empathy piece and part of your dialogue. But can we make our athletes and our coaches too resilient that you have to bounce back from it. You have to, you have to be able to take the failures, and maybe don't have enough of experience or reframing of failure. If that makes sense to you, Colum.
Yeah, I think it does, Fintan, and thank you for asking the question. I think this is the really interesting one, because, or one of the really, very interesting ones, because everybody thinks about care as nurturing, as the arm around the shoulder, as making things easier. But what I've tried to argue is actually it can be that if that's what your athletes need. But it can also be a challenge and say, okay, now go and experience and figure out this problem yourself, or go and solve this problem. Or here's a challenge which is you're going to struggle with. So it can also be demanding and challenging if that's what they then need. So if I need, want to become an international athlete, I will need tough sessions. So it can also be tough sessions. The difference for me, though, is I'd love those tough sessions to be surrounded by a web of care. So I'd love those sessions to be a coach coming along and saying, I love watching you play and perform. I think you're going to be great. I love working with you. I'm on your side. You will fail, but when you do, and I will challenge you, but I'm going to do this alongside and with you. And then the athlete knows, right, if I fail, I'm going to have a go, but actually the coach is a stable influence. They're not giving me mixed messages. So they're not telling me that they trust me, and then the minute I fail, they turn their back on me and they bring in a new player, for instance. Okay, so if it's an authentic, genuine relationship where there's genuine trust and dialogue, I think we then can present challenges. And I see John's put in here desirable difficulties, which would stretch. John, he's put that in the chat. It's a better phrase than I was doing, so thank you for helping me out, John. But those desirable difficulties need to be within a genuine, authentic relationship, a web of care. If not, and that is dialogue. So the athlete is coming and saying, actually, I need to be pushed. I need this. And the athlete understands why we're giving them those desirable difficulties. So again, it needs to be dialogue. It needs to be confirmation. If it's just done on what you infer as a coach, the athlete might not have a relationship where they trust you and think, why is this coach putting me through this? Do I agree with this? Do I consent to this? Probably not. So I do think the dialogue, the trust, the web of care needs to be there around those desirable difficulties. I don't know if that helps, Fintan.
Sorry, yeah, that's great, Colum. Yeah, that's like there's a bandwidth of it, and I think those, like what you said about those conversations, they're the opportunities to show you care by having had the dialogue and referring back to it. And thanks very much.
Colum, there was a comment made earlier between Harley and Fintan actually around the care coaching for themselves. And I mentioned that that's a topic that you're looking at the minute. Do you mind just touching on kind of that dynamic between, caring for the athlete versus, or as well as caring for themselves?
Yeah, so I'm fascinated by this. We're working on this with UK coaching at the moment. We've done a survey and we're doing some interviews around how coaches can be cared for. And the reason why I'm fascinated is because care is often an undervalued form of labor. So we see this in nursing, don't we? We see this in nursery school teachers, primary school teachers. They're often undervalued because their care, they're soft, it's just looking after people. Well, actually, what could be more important than looking after people? Okay, so that form of labor is often undervalued, it's overlooked, it's not resourced. And here I am now challenging coaches to care for 20 people in their team, for instance. Well, you know what? Observing people, listening to them, that's tough work, that's tough labor. So who's going to look after the coach if we're asking them to do that? And then we know coaching is chaotic, so they've got to also meet the needs of the performance director or the media or the parents as well. So coaches have got an awful lot on. And I'm asking them to care for other people on top of that. So in that scenario, there's potential for burnout, there's potential for coaches to fatigue and give up, and retention problems. So we need to really look at who is looking after the care, what support is around them. We haven't got the answers on that research yet. but we should have in the next kind of 6 months or so. So we'll be putting stuff out on social media on that. But some of the principles would apply. So is there a web of care? Is the coach in any caring relationships where somebody's engrossed in them as an individual, not just them as a performer? And of course, the coach also has to take responsibility and commit to their own self-care. So it is a relationship two ways. Maybe coach developers or assistant coaches can take on that role, coach mentors, and can they support coaches? But then coaches, are they contributing to their own self-care? Do they have lifestyles? And we all know what these are, the 8 hours sleep and 5 a day. How many of us are actually practicing what we preach that we tell our athletes? So if we are going to ask coaches to be carers and great performers in their own right, we then need to look after them as well.
Colum, we'll finish with one more question, if that's all right. I'm just conscious of time. Just a comment from Lara as well about, you know, the athletes aren't the only clients, I guess, that we need to care for, and parents are a significant factor within that. So again, it's about meeting both client and parent needs. But there's a comment from Alan, well, a question from Alan, which might be an impossible one to answer, but I'll throw it over to you. So Alan says, how do you know you truly are getting it right? Can you measure it effectively to some degree? If so, what do we do with that data? Maybe it's not a 1 minute response, but I'll challenge you with that.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure Alan's questions are never a 1 minute response, so I'll have a go on this for him. So there is a caring climate scale that has been devised that people can use to measure how cared for their climate is. And we've used that with the coaches now, so hopefully that will be out in a few months' time. So there is that scale, but I'm always very cautious of measuring things like relationships on a scale of 1 to 7 or 1 to 5. If I was to measure my relationship with my wife or my kids on that, you know, it would vary very much throughout the day, you know. So I do think actually we need to listen to people as well as using those scales. So that for me would be a more effective way, is to observe the relationships, listen to the relationships, listen to the cared for, because they're the one who determines whether it was caring or whether it was controlling. So to go back to Finton's point, if a coach comes in and says, you're doing a tough session tonight, the athlete can perceive that as controlling. But if the coach comes in and says, guys, what would you like to do tonight? How do you think you best develop? And the athlete says, I think we need a tough session. Now the same session is being perceived as caring. So that's why we need to listen to athletes and listen to the cared for, as well as measuring it on scales. I don't know if that helps, Alan. What to do with that data? Write it up, Alan, and complete your research is my advice on that one.
Thanks so much, Colum. Colum, if anyone wants to get in touch to learn more about your research or to ask any questions, how might they do that?
So the best way is at Liverpool John Moores. I can put the email in the chat for everybody. I'm also on Twitter, but I tend to be an observer on Twitter, a lurker. These topics don't tend to lend themselves to 100 characters. So an email, happy to have a chat with people about care research, care coach education, connect with people online. Would love to go and visit people and see how they're doing care work or how they're developing relationships. As I said before, we lead the master's program there. We're big emphasis on care. If you're interested in getting in touch, maybe you want to connect and contribute to research or placements, or just learn about some of the topics, or you're a coach that wants to develop, drop me an email. Happy to have a chat.
Thanks, Colum. Thanks for everyone who joined us tonight, and thanks a lot for the questions and the contributions. Next month, we've got Dr. Alex Blackett. I have put the link to next month's webinar in the chat. Alex will be talking about the transitions from athlete to coach, and whether we have to walk it to talk it. Specifically looking at football, professional football and rugby, but I'm sure more wider discussions will be had. So Colum, thanks so much again. Like, we kept everyone for that whole hour, so that's a top sign of a quality session. And thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully I'll see you this time next month. Have a lovely evening.